Have you ever looked at your resume and thought, oh no, how do I actually explain this career gap on my resume? The truth is, you're actually not alone. With the massive layoffs from companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, and the rest of the other companies globally, career gaps are actually going to be more common, and they are more common than they've ever been before. But here's the good news: a gap on your resume does not have to actually hurt your chance of getting that job. So if you don't know how to explain it, stick around and I'll show you how you can actually do it. Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tshidi and I'm back with a brand new video. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest fears that a lot of job seekers actually have a fear about. How do I actually explain career gaps on my resume without getting rejected before you even step into that job interview? Whether the gap is actually due to a retrenchment, family responsibilities, personal health break, or any other reason that you might need a break, I'm going to try and show you how best way to actually frame your story in a way that recruiters will also understand, or the hiring managers will understand for the future roles that you're looking at. Now, before we actually go into the solutions of how to do certain things, let's clear things up. Guys, career gaps are actually not a big issue, or it's not a crime. It doesn't actually mean that you're lazy, you're unqualified, or you are even unhireable. Career gaps happen because life happens. Back in the days, I know career gaps used to be one of the biggest things that people used to worry about, to say, why haven't you been working for the last 2 years? But these days, it's a lot easier to actually explain a career gap to recruiters, because recruiters have actually moved on with the times. Now, because we now understand that a career gap is actually not the end of your career, the way you explain it is where the magic happens. If you try to hide it or downplay it, or just worse, try and ignore it in the conversations that you're having with the recruiters, it normally raises a few red flags. Employers or recruiters or hiring managers tend to value a bit of a level of honesty and transparency. And more importantly, they actually want to see how you've handled certain things that you've actually done. Time away, what did you do in your time, or the time that you actually were not working while you were still taking that time off? How do you explain a career break to, let's say, a recruiter? First one that we're actually going to talk about is retrenchment. When it comes to a retrenchment conversation, focus on the company's restructuring, not your performance. Show how you actually stayed proactive during your time off while you were actually getting retrenched, or while you got retrenched, or as soon as you found out that you were getting retrenched. There's a few things that have actually raised a few red flags for us in the talent acquisition space for most people. One of those is the fact that the people that were actually affected by retrenchments at Meta were labeled as low performers, which is one of the worst days that you can actually label any person, especially because some of these performance matrix that companies use are sometimes very, very subjective and not necessarily focused on really the true performance. And the worst thing about actually labeling people non-performers is that you're actually telling other companies that they're not hireable. And that's one of the worst things you can ever do as a company. So I would hope that no other company does what Meta did in the last couple of weeks. So here's an example of how you can actually answer that. You can say, unfortunately, like many other companies, company X decided to actually start a restructuring program. So my role was actually impacted by the company-wide layoffs. However, I've tried to actually take a bit of time to do some professional development and focus on some of the topics that I felt I needed a bit of attention on. I've done some online courses. For example, I've focused a bit more on X skills or AI skills or whatever skills that you might have had. And I've also attended a few networking events that I wanted to make sure that I stay updated with what's happening in the industry. This break also gave me a bit of a fresh perspective in how I deal with some of the tasks that I might have actually worked with in the past. And I think this will be an opportunity to actually be able to come and implement some of these tasks in my future role. Here's why this particular explanation actually works. Number one is it removes blame from you and places it on the business itself without actually making that business look like it's a horrible company. The second thing is that it actually shows that you didn't just sit around. You were actually growing and developing and learning certain things while you were still on that particular break. And then thirdly, it ends on a positive note, making sure that you actually look focused to the future, because you're talking about how it gives you a fresh perspective to where you want to be or to contribute in the next company. There's another topic that a lot of people also tend to not necessarily talk a lot about, which is taking a break for family reasons. Family break. It could be for caregiving, parenting, whatever it might be. That's one of those things. Sure, how it actually was a planned decision. People tend to forget that you can actually tell people that this was a planned decision by yourself and your partner, or by yourself and whoever is actually affected. One of the things that you can actually say is that I made an intentional decision to actually step away to focus on my family. One of the things that I wanted to focus on was obviously taking care of my kids, if it is a kid thing, or looking after my family. However, I also use some of the time to actually try and enhance some of my skills, including a few online courses that I wanted to do. I've done a few volunteer work here and there whenever I wasn't necessarily needed 24 hours of the time. Now that I'm actually ready to return, I'm actually eager to apply some of this time off and some of this energy, invigorated energy, to be able to add some positive and fresh perspective to my new area and to the dynamic team that I'll hopefully be joining in your company. Here's also why this particular explanation works. Number one is you own the decision with confidence. You own in the fact that you decided to take a break off for whatever reason it is. Number two is it shows that you also kept learning and growing during the gap, and also ends by emphasizing your enthusiasm for returning into the workspace. It's almost like the STAR methodology of answering questions, owning the decision, and then you show the learnings that you've actually done during the break, and then you focus on emphasizing on the return to the environment and the fact that you have a fresh perspective in that particular way. The next topic, or the next reason why people decide to take a break, is for a few reasons. Number one is there's personal reasons. It could be mental health, it could be a sabbatical, it could be travel. Now, it's also one of those things where you need to try and keep it brief and focus on what you actually gained from that experience. For example, you could say, I took a break to focus on my personal growth and development. And during this time, I was able to actually do a few consulting courses here. I did a bit of freelancing to help with the charity next to my house or with the charity next to my place to also expand on my skills. This experience also gave me a refreshed perspective and just a bit of renewed energy, because I think one of the things that I realized is I was maybe in a little bit of a unfortunate rut, and that's why I decided to take this break to just go focus on myself. And I'm actually ready to bring in some of the skills that I've learned in working with some of the people in that charity in my next role. And I'm looking forward to actually working with you guys. Why does this work? One, it doesn't over explain it, which can make it seem like you're actually defensive, because sometimes when you over explain things, it looks like you're being very defensive. Number two, it shows that the break had actually a purpose and benefit. So you didn't just decide to just disappear. And then also positions you as someone who's actually ready and eager to come back to work. Once again, you're owning it, but you're not over explaining it. One of the things that we also have to talk about is handling career gaps on LinkedIn or CV. Instead of just leaving gaps on your CV or resume, try and use a few tactics that I'm actually going to share with you. So for example, use a professional title instead of just unemployed. Instead of leaving 2023 blank, you can list something like freelance marketing consultant, digital marketing certification. It's just one of those things where it allows people to see that you were doing something. And yes, obviously there's no company that you're going to put there, but you actually were freelancing, which means you're freelancing to a few companies. Always try and add any certifications that you might have had, any side projects that you also might have. And if you took a course or you freelanced or volunteered during your gap, list it, because hiring managers also love to see that there's also that continuous learning. You can also mention this in your cover letter, but as you guys know, I've got different views about cover letters because a lot of people don't necessarily really read them. But in companies where they do actually read it and require it, you can just mention a little line there to say, after taking a break to focus on my family or my mental health, I'm excited to actually apply some of the skills that I've learned in the break that I've actually taken in a company that's very forward looking like yours. Here's the bottom line, guys. Employers care more about how you handle your career gaps than the gap itself. And the issue that a lot of people tend to do is they tend to be very apologetic about a career gap that they had no control over. So that's why we always say, try and own it. Stop trying to hide it. There's no reason why you should hide it. And just to make sure that everybody can actually recap on this, number one is acknowledge that there is actually that gap with confidence. Number two, show what you actually did during the break, because sometimes people tend to forget that they did other things during the break, even if it's freelancing. And then number three, which is the last one, highlight the value that you actually bring now that you actually took the break. Now, remember guys, a career gap is not the end of your career. And nowadays, also one of the topics that I'll talk to you guys about soon is the topic of job hopping as we used to understand it, or as it used to be explained. That is also one of those topics that are no longer a big issue in the job market space. If you found this video helpful, please drop a comment. Let's talk about what's been happening. What's your biggest fears that you actually wish I could actually talk about when it comes to career gaps? And if you're ready to actually tackle your job or search with confidence, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's share with anyone who needs this advice.